Hello and welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable show where we meet every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, talk about all sorts of things fire service related. Tonight we happen to be talking about size up. How do we frame our size up? Lots of discussion, lots of opinions. We're going to work on an old acronym and kind of pick it apart and get the experience of the panel and talk a little bit about some of the criteria for making a size up. If you are watching us live on YouTube, I would love to have you make a comment. If you type a YouTube comment or if you type a comment on the events page itself, you can certainly interact with the panel. And if you are tweeting or using Twitter, you can use the hashtag FFT Firefighting Today Size Up. So with that, let's get started. Let's introduce the panel. Let's get going here, and it just takes a second. All right, my name is Peter Lamb. I'm the author of PeteLamb.com, and I'm the host of the Firefighter Training Podcast. Just a quick program note is we are having some major site difficulties with PeteLamb.com and Firefighting Today, so I ask your indulgence. You may have some difficulties on the site. In fact, I was told that Firefighting Today may not even be appearing, so that's a little bit of a challenge I'm going through this week, so just bear with me if you will, and we'll get you the content that you're used to in a short order. So let's introduce the panel. Adam.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Adam Ganley from Kellogg, Iowa, Kellogg Fire Department and Captain.
All right, great. Charlie, say hello.
Hi everyone, Charlie Hall, Deputy Fire Chief, TF Green Airport, here in Providence, Rhode Island.
All right, thanks Charlie, appreciate you being here. Captain Joe is with us. Captain Joe, introduce yourself to the panel.
Good evening everybody, I'm Captain Joe Pernesti. I'm with the City of Elyria, Ohio Fire Department. I got 26 years in and I'm happy to be part of this panel. Thanks.
All right, thank you Joe. Ethan, say hello.
Hi Pete, Ethan Bansek, Lorraine, Ohio, student of the trade and Pass It On Fire Training.
Pass It On Fire Training, we want you to check that site out. John, thanks for being with us. Say hello.
Good evening everybody, how you doing? John Haywood, City of State Fire Department Lieutenant, 14 years. It's great to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks John, I always appreciate you being with us. Frank, say hello to the audience.
Frank Blackley, Assistant Chief, Wilmington, North Carolina Fire Department.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate you being here. Greg, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Greg Howard, Deputy Chief of the Dashwood Fire Department, Vancouver Island in Canada.
All right. Thanks for being here, Greg. Joe Starnes, say hello to the group.
Joe Starnes, Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department, Project Kill the Flashover, and joestarnes.com. Thank you, Chief, for having me.
All right, I appreciate it. Warren, last but certainly not least, say hello.
Good evening, Warren Whitley, retired Assistant Chief from Prince William County in Virginia.
Thanks for being here, Warren. I appreciate it. All right, so tonight, there's a million acronyms in the fire service, and if you want to invent a new acronym, you can get yourself to be famous somehow, but there are a lot of traditional acronyms that are in there that have been around, talking about what things, when we say size up, right, there's a couple of things that always get bandied about when we talk about size up. Size up begins at dispatch. Well, I might even argue that point. I think size up begins at pre-fire planning your district, your response area. So, we can take this to different levels and we can go different ways. So size up, there are some factors to size up that you use to make some decisions. Now, I want to talk about what those factors are, and I want to reach out to the experience of the panel in how you make those determinations. So one of the factors we talk about when we make a size up, I'll throw out the softball first. I think life hazard is something that we talk about as one of the factors of making a size up. Now, last week we spoke at length. If you didn't see the show, please go back and look at last week's show. We talked a little bit about rescue and all that sort of things. But when I look at an occupancy, what are some things that tell me who lives there, how many people live there, how many apartments in this building. What are some of the things that I can look at when I'm arriving at a structure to talk about the life hazard characteristic? Anybody on the panel, just unmute, and I'll reach out to you and tell me what you think. Ethan, what's a factor that can tell me about life hazard?
Pete, some of the clues to determine multi-family occupancies: multiple doorbells, multiple mailboxes, multiple electric and gas meters.
Right, right. Okay, that's perfect. So looking at the building, seeing what you see, what other things might tell us? How do we determine that there may be maybe somebody that needs assistance evacuating that structure? Maybe it's not the unique situation. What other things, when we look at this building, might give us some indication to what type of life hazard we might have?
Chief, I'm going to throw one out. We've had one in our district, wheelchair ramps.
Yeah, so you pull up and now there's a wheelchair ramp. Okay, so not only do you have a life hazard, but one of the things I talk about when I train is you now have a life hazard that is absolutely going to require a rescue. You know, that's probably a two-person rescue or more in this case, depending on what the situation is. You know, we often find out that we get people, we escort people out. We do make hand-to-hand rescues. We do recover unconscious people. We do a lot of that stuff. But in many times, we assist people out. You look at YouTube, you look at anything, and you can see people being escorted down ladders or whatever. You see a wheelchair ramp. That's a big deal. You have to assume that somebody else is going to get you know, have to be rescued to get out. So certainly that would be a good one. Other panel members, don't throw those in the chat. Toss them right out there so for the audience. So Captain Joe, you got one?
I think in my town, our biggest issue is you'll have a large original single family that's been chopped up into a duplex or a triplex, and on the Charlie side, you'll have some sort of fire escape going up to the third floor or second floor. To my department anyway, it's a dead giveaway. You got multiple families in that dwelling.
Sure, and you know, inspected or uninspected, right? If it's up to code, there probably will be a fire escape. There's also other indicators there may not be, but that's a great one to tell you that somebody's living up above. Both Ethan and John, you both had good points. Why don't you toss those out one at a time? Ethan, what was the one you had tossed out?
Pete, I said curtains or drapes over windows in attics or basements, which could indicate a life hazard down there.
Sure, right. You got the finished basement, you got the in-law apartment, you got the loft, the 2.5 story, and the half story has curtains up in it. Certainly you got something going on there for sure. John, you also had one.
Yeah, sizing up the air conditioners as you're looking, basements as well as attics.
All right.
Knowing where the fire is. The other thing is the occupancy goes hand in hand with the life hazard as well. If we're talking single families or multifamilies, or we're pulling up on an assisted living place. We're getting a lot of, in New Jersey, we're getting a lot of handicapped or special needs being placed into private dwellings with a moderator that's there. So
right.
Knowing your district and pre-plan is a big thing, and that's more of an issue for potential rescue or actually people that aren't thinking on the level of normal people. So we're trying to get them out and rationale and reason with them as well.
Yeah, so in Rhode Island, we call them, in Rhode Island and Mass, I don't know what you call them, they're group homes, rehabilitation facilities, there are some halfway houses, there are all of those things that might indicate, you know, simple things as you look around, the car in the driveway with the handicap sticker on the mirror as you're making a stretch, as you're stretching the line, you know, you might have something that you could look at there as well. So I think we've got some considerations about what the life hazard was, and since John gave me a segue, the other one we look at is occupancy of the building. Now when I say occupancy of the building, I'm really not referring to the occupants per se. I'm talking about building use and occupancy. So how do we talk about a couple of examples? What are, you know, if you came upon a particular occupancy, why would that be a challenge? And how do we identify occupancies that might be of risk? Frank, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, hopefully a lot of that should have been done during the pre-planned process before you ever arrive. I think that's one of the things that people tend to forget. But obviously, if you're looking at an apartment building, is it a restaurant that is on game night and you've got 300 people there? Does the building have sprinklers? Does it have an alarm system? All of those different things to think about when you arrive on the scene. You know, is the parking lot full of cars? Should give you a pretty good indication that you have lots of people there.
Right, right. So places of assembly and so forth. Good. What about obviously the known hazardous places? Greg and I were in discussion yesterday. We talked about an auto body shop, right? When I pull up and I see an auto body shop, what does that indicate to me? How is that affecting my size up? We know what's in that building. So when you look at the occupancy, I couldn't agree more with Frank. We do not do enough pre-planning, in my opinion. We do a good job with code inspection. There are folks that will go out in the district and look at their area, and I think that's invaluable. But really some in-depth pre-plans and making sure that info gets passed along. Unfortunately, in many departments, a shift or a group will go out and do a pre-plan, and that never gets translated or it gets filed away, right? If you can put it in your computer system, that would be the way to go. How do we evaluate exposures as we begin to size up? How do we evaluate exposures? What do you do? What does it mean if you have closer exposures? If you have a narrow exposure, an alley, something John certainly probably has, Frank probably has, Charlie, you certainly were exposed to this, tight exposures. So I have exposures. I pull up, I recognize I have exposures. How does that affect my size up? Let's talk a little bit about how that affects your size up. John?
Truthfully, the how close and the proximity, as well as what the construction of the siding is. The Northeast has a lot of this asphalt siding known as gasoline siding. You get something of an alleyway within 3 to 5 feet of an exposure with the wind coming at the exposure building and heating up that gasoline siding. That's just going to take off. So large water at that time, cooling it with the 2.5s, soaking it, trying to get ahead of it to keep it cool before it ignites.
Okay, perfect.
Challenge.
Perfect. That's a great segue. I'll leave it out there, but that's a common firefighting technique, right? Is reduce the temperature of the exposure building to prevent ignition and off-gassing. I'll tell you what we ought to do is we ought to study that and see if we could bring that inside a building, that same concept. That might catch on. I don't know. I'll have to run that by Chief Steins and see if we can get that to catch on. Cooling and preventing off-gassing like we do on exposures. I'm just teasing. I'm giving them the business. The audience knows that. So the other thing is, and we're going to talk about that a little later, is that the exposures, obviously, all of these things are going to play into the amount of resources we need to call, right? The extensive life hazard, as Chief Blackley mentioned. You talk about the crowded nightclub or whatever. So you need more resources depending on the results of these considerations. What I did was I said size up considerations. These are all the considerations we make. We'll talk about what to do with them in a couple of minutes. What impact does the weather have? Well, I'm sorry, let me get to another comment there. Did I see a comment go by about exposure protection in that alley, John? I think that was to your conversation, was the deck gun, right? Obviously, we throw the deck gun in that alley if we can. That saves some of our manpower. So thank you for that, Charlie. So the weather, what's the deal with the weather? How does that impact our decision making, or how can it impact our decision making?
Snowstorm. We
Snowstorm.
get a snowstorm, and we cover a lot of rural area here. So if we got our decision making, we better get tankers coming as soon as possible, because that weather could be a big delay for what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, does anybody do anything different for weather conditions? Do you staff differently in high weather conditions or anything like that? Is anybody, so we know that's a consideration. What are you doing about it as a department Is there anything you do? So snow is a big deal. As we record this in November of 2014, we have seen something unprecedented in Buffalo, New York. Now, it's not unusual for Buffalo, New York to have a lot of snow, but to get 6 feet of snow in 72 hours, that's probably a big deal. So certainly that can have an impact. I also did see, Joe, you want to talk about that a little bit. What happens? Should we fight fires differently when there's a 40 or 50 mile an hour wind, right? Should we begin to operate differently on the wind driven?
Yeah, well, that's Mother Nature's positive pressure blower. So you can just take it that parallel. If you were going to use a blower, think about all the conversation we have about blowers and cautions and all using PPA. When Mother Nature is the blower, we don't have the throttle. So yes, we would fight it differently, and there's some things we were doing differently today than we were doing if I was doing a few years ago, and that was we're blocking it or even watching the pressures associated with it. So yes.
Yep, absolutely. Warren, did you want to dive in on that? On the wind-driven fire?
Well, Joe's made the good point on that is, one, we don't have control over it, speed, direction, anything like that. So you got to figure out how can you use it to your advantage, if possible, as PPA, or how do you mitigate the wind and consider attacking from a different spot and keeping the windward side closed up. So there's a couple of things there. One other point I wanted to make, our department that I left was for high heat days was actually adding personnel just because of the heat stress that was already there just wearing the gear. Right.
Okay. And I think the reverse of that, right, is in addition to high heat, you got the extreme cold. I think some member of the panel punched out the major storms, the hurricanes, or anything that we can predict. Most departments will generally staff up for those prior to the emergency. So I think that those are all things, these are all some of the size up considerations. I think those are some of the things that we talk about. All right. What is the height and area? How does the height and area of the building that we're in affect our size up decision making? When we talk about, I don't care if you want to talk square feet, cubic feet, we should really be talking cubic feet, but how does the height and area of the building have an impact on our size up factors?
How much line we're going to be stretching?
Say it again?
How much line we're going to be stretching?
Yeah, okay, certainly the length of the stretch, length of ladders, absolutely. What else can it impact? Greg, if you don't get the answer to this one, I'm going to be angry. You've never seen me angry on camera, but I'm going to be angry about this.
So for volume?
Yes.
Sorry, you cut in and out a little bit, Pete. Just give me the question one more time there.
So the effect of height and area. Adam mentioned the length of the stretch and length of ladders, etc. What else, when we get into this large building, is a factor for us, or should be a factor of our size up?
Well, there's a number of things. I mean, it can definitely hide fire conditions in a high ceiling. So we can have quite a tenable environment on the floor, and smoke can be hiding a significantly higher ceiling temperature. And also, if we have fire venting out and we have high ceilings, there can be a considerable amount of fire up in the ceiling, or it's on the lower vent areas, vent holes.
Right, and it certainly talks about the amount of air we're going to use too. Our personnel's SCBA capability, right? We have a number of NIOSH reports we could read on any given day talking about people running out of air or overextending our air supply, and that's a big deal. I think, Warren, did you have something about the talk of how long is it going to take me to do a 360, and quite frankly, how do I do a 360? Was that your point there?
Yeah, especially if you get into row houses or strip malls, things like that, you may have to rely on whoever's on the Charlie side to finish up your 360. I mean, the important point there is don't ignore it just because it's a very large building and do the moth to the candle syndrome. You got to figure out how you're going to get that intelligence on the rest of the building as you do your size up.
Right, and there are people being creative. It could be the battalion chief that may do the size up in a vehicle. if you have access to get around it, that may be a piece. It may be another engine company that gets a look on a different side. So I think that's a big deal. I think that's important. We saw some other stuff. I can't follow the chat room fast enough, but throw some of these out, folks, so that we've got them for the audience, because the audience isn't seeing those.
One of the things that's as far as a main street or a commercial building fire is, you're talking about going down a street and into the back like an alley. Just get up on the roof. You throw a crew up on the roof for a recon, have them check the Charlie side out. And so if there's ever a problem with trying to get somebody in an alley right away or whatever, you can get a crew up on the roof. You can look down. They can look on the Charlie side right away.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a valid one. Somebody else, go ahead.
The old quick cal, old school quick cal for fire flow calculation, what you're going to need for the building. Figuring out, getting a rough idea of the volume divided by 100 is how I used to do it. It tells me how many lines I'm going to need. Do I have the capability there with me, or do I need to call more help? Do I need more pumpers? Do I need, even more importantly, more manpower?
Yeah, so what is the volume? And the other thing that we are now starting to learn, I think we knew it all the time, but I think we're learning more about it, is if you've got a gigantic building, you have a lot of fuel, but you also have a lot of air, right? We have a lot more air contained within the structure. So always the size of the compartment we're operating in becomes a big deal, so that's important when we talk about height in the area. Anything else? Anybody else on height in the area and size? I like Captain Joe. You can go to the roof, look over the backside. If you can't get to it, I think that's a vital one. Anybody else? Go ahead,
real quick. Terrain. That's one of the added ones that Chief Mike Turpak from Jersey City Fire wrote in his book. Talking about when you walk in on the first floor. Are you actually on the first floor, or are you walking in on the third floor due to the terrain change in the rear? Pittsburgh has had some major fires and actual fatalities due to that issue a number of years ago. I'm reading some of the NIOSH reports as well. So knowing that you're going in on the first floor or the third floor and getting a report of a fire on the fourth floor, is that actually the second, or is that actually the first? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think anytime I teach people, whenever you're operating in what I would call a split level building, or as you say, a terrain built into the side of the hill, or whatever it happens to be, I think the fire service history here is pretty good for us. In the Mary Pang building in Seattle, we lost 4 firefighters. That was a split level building. Sergeant Carter in Washington, D.C., in a hardware store, that was a split-level building.
Bryceland Street.
Bryceland Street, as the captain, as the lieutenant just alluded to, when you, Captain Joe, was Pittsburgh. We've got any number of these incidences, and the most recent, I think, was in San Francisco, probably 3 or 4 years ago, where 2 firefighters were lost, also on a split-level building. So, great point, John. That was that's extremely valuable. I think that should be part. When you recognize that it is fraught with communication challenges, it's fraught with operational challenges, opposing lines, all sorts of things get carried away on that. Ethan is adding the Diamond Heights fire. So, excuse me. Is any number of things with terrain. So thank you for that. I think that's certainly applicable to height in the area. No question about it. What is the time? What does time have to do with our size up? Frank kind of alluded to it on a Friday night, if you will, at the nightclub. That certainly is time. What else in time could be a factor, and how would that affect our size up decision making?
Pete, time is going to give you a pretty good idea of where people are going to be inside of the structure.
Okay, so the theory that, nighttime people are generally in their bed, sleeping, whatever, if it's normal situations, time might tell you where people are, certainly. I think that's important. Good one. Captain Joe?
Yeah, I think that's good, and Ethan brought that up, but I will say that I think we have to take into consideration now, when that was created, you're thinking a normal life cycle, but anymore, people are going to be sleeping at 10 a.m. and you just can't. That's one thing I'll tell younger firefighters or inexperienced or younger officers is the books in that time frame, you got to throw it out. That can really bite you if you pull up at 10 in the morning and think, well, what are the odds that they're going to be up there? I don't buy that anymore. I think people's life cycles and their sleep cycles, and you can't guess anymore. You just can't guess.
No, I wouldn't disagree. I don't think you should make a guess. I think it's an assumption, and we can't, I'm not. I think that's a valid point, but I think that again, all we're talking about is we make assumptions every day, right? We say we can't make assumptions, but we do every day, and even our basic discussion we're having tonight about size up is somewhat based on assumptions, somewhat. Somebody's using the term profiling, and it's kind of sort of what we're doing in some ways, but I don't discount that. How many people, we used to think if you pull up to an office building, you got a certain problem. How many people today, hundreds and hundreds of people, are telecommuting? People are working from home. So I think to Captain Joe's point, you think people are out at work today, and in fact, they might be home. So. Excuse me. John, you had something that you wanted to talk about there.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about time of year, since we're starting to get into the holiday season. And, Walmart's been packed with Christmas stuff since September. You start looking at fire load now. What's going to be increased? Stock, shelving, aisleways, so it cuts into potential means of egress. There's a whole list of issues when you start looking at commercial store fires in this time of year, especially for that are going to be selling to the public directly when they come in and do their shopping.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie and I live adjacent to a limited access highway here that is probably going to be all but closed here starting on Black Friday. It's the whole route to a bunch of retail stores, and the ability for apparatus to move freely. Even your response time can be affected. That's certainly what John said with the stock and those problems. But even your response time, your ability to respond. Somebody said time of the week. Is that what I saw just pop up? Was that you, Joe?
Yeah, day of the week. Day of the week, a week of the month, holidays. Kind of your own. When I said profile a while ago, it's kind of your own pre-planned profile. You have an idea. And I think Frank mentioned, or someone mentioned a while ago. It's right after the ball game. The football game just turned out. They're at the restaurants. They're at the bars. They're wherever they are. It's your profile of your district and your pre-planning that's important to know. You kind of get in the South. The Bible Belt might be Sunday at 10 o'clock. That kind of thing. You've got different profiles for different areas where you live and what you do. So. Factory shift change, the many different aspects, but it's all in your pre-plan and all in your what your profile for your response areas are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you gave me a great segue there. I got to just step off into a small commercial here because you said, after the ball game and in a restaurant, right? None of the people watching this or any of the folks on the panel, we should be reminded that this week is the anniversary of the Coconut Grove fire. And the discussion about a packed restaurant after a football game was just real pertinent as that occurs this week. It is the nature of this week's firefighter training podcast as well. Shameless plug inserted right in there. So I just plugged that one right in there. So, yeah, okay, we're talking about Thanksgiving, the most traveled day of the year, transportation emergencies, all of those things. So when we think about time, also Captain Joe had one. You're talking about the Main Street situation. Captain Joe, you talk about that. Maybe the owner is staying in that store. Maybe there's an apartment in the store kind of thing. You talk about that if you would.
Well, I'm big on as far as the studying of your Main Street type of fire. mom and pop type business in old ordinary type construction, and these people, this is their life, and a lot of times they'll work late hours, and they'll have a cot or a couch in the back room, and they'll hunker down. And like Joe Starnes just put on the message board, a taxpayer. That's a taxpayer. The person that probably has the business, owns the apartments above, but after hours, it might be sleeping in the basement, or look at Buffalo, New York. That's probably another day for another webcast here or hangout. But they thought people were in the basement of the fatal fire and line of duty death in Buffalo about 4 or 5 years ago.
Right, absolutely.
Hey, Pete,
Yes.
what about how it affects us, turnout time? Career departments, everybody's asleep at 3 in the morning when the bells tip, or the volley departments that it's 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday.
Yeah, so certainly the time of day can affect your manpower, or could affect your response capability, depending on the career side, where you are in your shift, whether you're in a rest period, as they say, or whether you're 2 o'clock in the afternoon for the volley department might be more difficult. So yeah, absolutely, time of the day would have the effect on response. I think time is a critical factor. I mean, obviously we know it when the bell hits, but we're trying to give folks that are watching, how do you make the opinion? Hopefully we'll get to the end here and talk about how we weigh these things. And so a lot of people teach the points of size up, but nobody tells you what to do about it. And I think that's, I'm not sure we'll get there in this 1 hour session, but I think that we need to start talking about what to do about the points of size up and how they affect us. And I think we're doing that exactly now as we get together. So a big one, we all know about it. What are some factors? We talked about height and area. We talked about the size of the building, but we really didn't talk about the construction of the building. What role does the construction play? How can I help detect what the construction is? All of those kinds of things, they play a factor. Captain Joe, you wanna dive in?
I'll get on my soapbox for 5 seconds and then I'll get off.
I'll give you the red screen. Don't make me do it.
The biggest problem I have with all the acronyms and all the new, and it's not new, but all the data, is I don't want to see our fire service forget about profiling the building and knowing what they're getting into after you do all the external hits and all the good stuff. When I'm talking like that, I'm not cutting on anyone, or I'm not making any kind of stance on one side or another. But what I worry about is the young firefighter who is bombarded with all this data and technology. I got to hit it here, hit it here. You better know what kind of building you're going into eventually when you do go inside. And I think the other thing is that we all know when we pull up to the McDonald's or the Taco Bell or the auto parts store that's a standalone building, yes, we know it's going to collapse, and that's bad news. Where I'm worried is the old Type 3 construction. That's where we're going to get in trouble, because you got to go in there, or you're going to go in there. You're going to have problems if you don't know building construction, and I think it's a lost art, and it's going to continue to kill firemen.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think construction's an important piece. There are a lot of great folks talking about construction. Chris Norm has kind of carried the flag there for a little bit. Chris is doing some stuff on that. So I think that you're absolutely right. We fight fire in other people's buildings. It's important we understand how those buildings are constructed. I think, John, you had a great point that I want to. So the construction of the building, you had a good summary statement. It decides where the fire and smoke travel. You talk about that, if you will. That note you put in the chat room.
Okay. By knowing what building construction you have, you know where the smoke and fire spread will potentially go. You know the routes, whether it's going to be open interior stairs for types 1 and types 5, which is ordinaries and wood frame. But the big phrase is know what the fire is going to do with the building, what the building is going to do with the fire. Knowing that is part of the battle. When I teach at the academy, I harp on building construction and fire behavior go hand in hand, and they always will. That's the two things that will get you in the jackpot if you don't know where the fire is going to go and you're not reading the building properly.
Yeah, and I would just from an instructional standpoint, I'm angry with folks that just teach building construction. I think we've got to teach people what type of fire they can expect in what type of building, and I think that that's important. You know, we don't tie those together as well as you may have just tied them together there, John. Let's hear from Christine, who's out in the audience. Again, I apologize that the chat room sometimes gets a little behind us here. So she's talking about the SRO, the single room occupancies, subdivided rooms. There are hazards presented. Be aware of this during building inspections, pre-plannings, and look for clues. The only thing I would say to answer Christine is that's all well and good if it's an inspected occupancy. The problem is many of these are what I would call illegal renovations or certainly unknown to the building department renovations. So I don't disagree, Christine. I think they are a tremendous hazard. But you know, if you can figure it out, I'm not sure who put that up, whether it's Captain Joe or Ethan, about Black Sunday. I mean, that really is the FDNY incident. That really was based on divided apartments and single room occupancies, along with a number of other things, lack of water, etc. So thank you for that, Christine. I think that's good. Anything else on construction before we dive off of that? Warren, go ahead. Talk to us about that. Give us that comment that you threw in the chat room, Warren.
Well, I'm glad, I think it was John, brought up the building construction and the fire behavior piece, because fire behavior is very predictable, and if you put that in tandem with the building construction knowledge, you can pretty much know where that fire is going to go based on what you're doing or not doing. Where is it getting its air? Where are the outlets? Things like that. And, you know, what effect are hose streams having? So with those two pieces of knowledge, really you shouldn't have any surprises.
I can agree with that. However, I can tell you, as having I actually went to 2 fires in my career, and I watched a movie once. I have been surprised, though, Warren. Thought I was a student in the trade, but I can tell you, I have been surprised once or twice. Good comment by Chief Starnes, and that is, you know, the construction is the whole collapse issue as well. The whole building collapse, collapse zones, secondary collapse zones. All of that. Captain Joe, you want to talk about those questions? What are the 3 questions you're talking about?
Yeah, I get a lot of, if you're a young officer, a lot of things, well, how do I do all this? How do I size it up? And I try to break it down. The 3 W's. What do I got? Okay, I got a fire in what type of construction or what type of building. Where is it? And I think a big failure on a lot of inexperienced or a lot of incident commanders' parts, where's it going? Where's it going to go in 5 minutes, 10 minutes? And that, I think that plays a large role in how we spot our apparatus and everything. But where is the fire going? I think we get transfixed on what's in front of us right now, and I think a lot of YouTube videos and everything kind of hurt that, because you get transfixed on fire. You got to look at where it's going in 5 minutes or 10 minutes from now.
Yeah, I think that's valid. And we're gonna do one more, and then we're actually, excuse me, the other W that the National Fire Academy has been teaching for years is what do I need to control it? What are my resources? Right, is the third piece of that puzzle. So we'll talk about how we do that. You know, exactly. What about if I move the location of the fire in the building? What about if I say that I have a mattress fire on the 3rd floor, and I take the same mattress in the same building, and I now have a mattress fire in the basement? What effect does the location of the fire, even if it's the same volume, what does that have to do with my size up? Ethan?
Pete, one thing, if it's balloon frame construction, that fire's going right up the chases, up to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floor and up.
Okay, so depending, you know, back to construction, right? All of these considerations we're putting are going back, and they're all interconnected here and intertwined in some cases. Frank, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just kind of tying to what Ethan said, I think if you definitely got to worry about the smoke spread throughout the building. Do you have any open shafts? Do you have doors that are propped open, that they're in stairwells that should be shut? Just some of those things just kind of popped in my mind, is that you got to worry about the entire building at that point, because you don't know where that smoke is going to go.
Right, and so when you talk about smoke spread, you're talking about a couple things. You're talking about the mattress on the top floor, the third floor. You might have some time to rescue some occupants on lower floors very easily. You might be able to move pretty quickly through the first floor of that building with, with a mask on, but maybe unlimited visibility and no heat. You're on your feet. You can move through areas pretty quick to do a primary search. When you've got that smoke condition from the basement up, it's also slowing our reflex time. It's slowing our time. We now have no visibility. We now have some ability. So absolutely, the location of the fire within the building is critical to what we're doing. So, John, you got a case history? Let's talk about the case history. Go ahead. You're muted, John.
Okay.
There you go.
We just had a fire back in September where it was a basement fire in a balloon frame. OMD had 4 apartments. It was a setback. It was just up 22 steps. And of course, when we show up on arrival, we have a woman sitting on the roof, dangling and having smoke envelop her. So first 2 trucks got to go right to work for the rescue. Engine's doing a long stretch because it's a setback. A lot of things go wrong with a lot of different changes. Stretching a 2.5 to a gated Y was a great idea for the guys, so we got water on it quickly, as quick as possible. But like you said, we've got different things that going on. You move that mattress to the top floor, I've got very little fire load above it. That basement, you've got that whole building that's a fire load in that compartment that we have to deal with and contend with.
Right, absolutely. Good. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, understanding that of the location of the fire. And the last thing that we talk about is that is the apparatus and manpower and water supply, right? Those are the last pieces that we'll be able to cover, is the apparatus and manpower and water supply. How does that affect what you're going to do at the fire? Just a show of hands from the panel, how many people respond with too much manpower? Okay, I think I got that. That was a pretty easy one for me. I think I got that. We don't have too many people responding. So how does some of the folks, Adam, talk about the fact that you don't have a water supply? Talk about that rural water supply. How does that make your operation different?
Yeah, definitely. When we go out in a rural area, we don't have the hydrants like we do here in the town. So we're known that we do have a working fire out in the rural area. We're going to be getting the tankers coming, and when I mean tankers, I'm going to verify water tenders, and we're possibly going to also look for a pond that we can take one of our trucks and actually create a draft and fill tankers as they come and go out of ponds. We do have a few lakes around there that have dry hydrants that we can hook up to a dry hydrant and pull water from the lakes. So our big challenge is the water supply out in the rural area.
Yeah, and so if let me summarize what Adam said. He said time. That's what he said, time. All of what he said takes time, and it takes people to be able to do that, and you're splitting your operation. Sometimes we take for granted in the city operations or the urban operations that we have a hydrant 500 feet behind us. We can lay a supply line, lay a 4 or 5 inch feeder, and life is good for a lot of reasons. Once you challenge your water supply, I think that becomes an issue. That's a big deal. In terms of manpower, how do you need to be able to determine how much personnel you need? How do you figure that out? Do we just say magically that NFPA 1710 says 17 to 20 personnel? Is that how we do it, or how do we adjust Yeah, I think I just saw this, and I have no doubt where it came from. It must have come from Chief Stans when we talk about variables. If the standard says 17 to 20, how do we adjust? What factors that we talked about might make me adjust those manpower thoughts? Anybody want to touch that?
I think it goes back to the building and the construction. You know, going back to what I would call the throwaway building, the standalone type 2 brand new auto parts store or whatever. You know, if it's involved in fire, a couple deck guns and minimum amount of people. But if I got a balloon frame fire burning in Elyria, Ohio, man, I gotta have it's more than 17 or 20 personnel. You're rotating a lot of people, and you're looking at 30 people, and I think that's one that is sometimes missed. That it's not necessarily the big fire that you need a lot of people. It's the little ones that you got to chase around the park.
All right, so let me ask you, just based on the size of the building and what you would say, you know, and we can argue this, right? But a relatively small fire, a limited amount of smoke showing, no smoke pushing, none of those real bad things that we think about. Would you call for a striking additional alarms just based on the size of the building? That's to you, Captain Joe.
Well, it matters what I got showing. I mean, if I have smoke showing in a basement of a balloon frame, yeah, I'm calling for help. I think that's a big one on experience and past life, or past fire life, I should say, experiences. But yeah, I mean, it depends on what you have showing or what you have in front of you.
Okay.
Or on recon. All
right. So after we do a 360 or after we do a thermal 360, we might be able to figure out what our we can isolate some things. We can get some something about that. Go ahead, Greg. That needs to be said to the audience, please, if you can.
Yeah, we're primarily a bedroom district, and like you alluded to earlier tonight, Pete, I mean, our weakest turnouts are weekday daytime calls because people are out of district working, and we've offset the risk by with our mutual aid partners. So when we get a confirmed structure fire, so it's a fire showing, multiple reports of smoke showing from a building, basically anything other than automatic alarms, we automatically ring out for mutual aid engines and additional manpower. And we staff a 24/7 duty officer, so typically, we're on scene in a couple minutes to 6-7 minutes based on the travel time, and at that point he'll stand down the engines, but we call it front loading the call. So we get people turning out immediately and then stand it down as required, rather than wait the other way around.
Okay, and does that happen, and I don't want to play semantics, but just briefly, is that mutual aid you have to call, or is that automatic aid, certain things trigger it to come?
Any recognized working fire, so if we get phone calls saying fire showing from a building or heavy smoke showing from a building, those are, or multiple alarms with the alarm company. There's a number of things that our dispatch center looks for. They automatically page out the other departments, as well as we get hydro, police, and ambulance for standby.
Okay. Joe, you want to talk about, you said something briefly, if you can give me a response on front loading Greg said front loading, but you were talking about these rural water supply, starting this stuff early. You want to just make a comment about that?
Yeah, pre-planning in our volunteer system, if you should have a required fire flow in your pre-plan, the ones you're doing pre-plans for, and if you've got a required fire flow in the pre-plan, on the alarm, you ought to be establishing that fire flow. So right. That's you don't want to establish that fire flow after you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. You figure that out ahead of time, apparatus, water supply, and manpower requirements to get the required flow. So I think that's there. What I'd like to do with the remaining time, and we didn't cover this in depth, absolutely, but let's speak to those people that are riding in the right front seat, those new people. I want to share some of the panel's experience, if you choose it to be shared. How do you develop, how do you run through these points in your mind? How do you make decisions? If we have to look at all of these considerations, and I look to like the Warren and Frank's been around, Joe, you've been around a long time. We can make these decisions pretty quickly as long as we have appropriate and adequate intelligence. But I'd like to run the panel. Anybody that would like to respond, how do we begin to make these size-up decisions and inform all of these 12 or 13 considerations together? Anybody want to just, and again, we've got about 10 minutes to go, so I want summary statements. Give somebody a tidbit here to walk away with that will help them make size up. That's our purpose tonight.
You're right on the front seat of an engine, and I've always been an advocate of the three-sided size up as you pull up. And you can catch side 4, side 1, and side 2 as you drive the pump by to give the truck the front of the building. Based on what you see there, it's going to tell you a lot of the story. You need to get around to the number 3 side or the Charlie side, depending upon what department you're with and what your terminology is. But you've got to rely on what is in front of you. And as when I'm instructing young students, I try to tell them again, as we discussed last week, that building, the condition it's in, is telling you a story. And it's a very simple story to read if you just know what the words are and what you're looking for. The building will tell you what you need to do, and you have to react to what you see.
Okay, that's worthwhile. Captain Joe, you got a quick summary statement. You got a word of wisdom here.
Yeah, I put down in the chat, if you're going to be a good officer, you got to learn how to dream and make believe. And what I mean by that is you can read all the books you want, but if you don't start playing out in your mind as you're passing houses in your off-duty time or on-duty time or buildings, if you're not laying your head on your pillow before you go to bed and thinking to yourself, what am I going to do if I get a fire in this building or a fire in that type of house, you will never succeed as a fire officer. You will never succeed as an incident commander.
Yeah, no, I think you pre-plan on your way to work. I think that's exactly right. I think that makes some sense. I was nervous about when you said make-believe an officer because I think I worked for some of them, but that's a whole nother roundtable, I think. Ethan, what
right.
You're a student of the trade. What are you reading about size up? What are you reading? What do you want to tell the folks that are listening? Ethan, you might be muted still. Is anybody hearing him, or is it just me?
No, I don't hear him.
All right, I'll come back to him. So, John,
I've got his logo.
Yeah, okay. John, go ahead. What do you got for the folks? You got some experience. What can you tell us that might help tie this thing and put the ribbons on it?
Just like some of the guys were saying, we have some knowns. We know it's a time of year. You know what the weather's going to be. You wake up, when I wake up going into work that morning, I'm listening to the news. I want to know what the weather's going to be. I want to know what's going to be changing, wind, temperature, all that good stuff. We also know time of year for fire loading. You also know your district, understand what you're going to be at. So your pre-plans, that always helps you. Imagining what you're going to do is a great thing too, but you always rely on what you've done in the past or what other officers have done in the past and what's worked. The phrase is rapid prime decision making. It's that Rolodex in your head. Does this picture match what's happened in the past? Does this work? What didn't work? What did work? And go with it. Have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C. And don't worry about asking for help. Talk to a more senior officer. Hey, what do you think? This is my gut. Truthfully, my gut has never let me wrong. Something's going down, something feels wrong. Trust your gut. Ask somebody else, what do you think? This is where I think it's going. What do you think? Building construction, fire behavior. The two biggest things that will keep you safe or get you hurt. You got to know them.
Good stuff, John. Thank you. Ethan, I snuck by you. Anything you want to add as we summarize the size up discussion?
Well, Pete, one aspect of size up that we didn't touch on a lot, and I know we can maybe do something about that in the future, is reading smoke and reading the smoke and seeing what the smoke is telling you and where the fire is going to go and all that stuff.
All right, good. That's a good one. That's a good discussion to have. I like it. That will tell you a lot of things about what's going on. Frank, what can you tell a youngster that's watching us about how to tie this size up all together?
think a lot of what everybody else has already said are good points. I always like to think of when I'm going, I guess I go back to when I was at the fire marshal's office, is that usually when you're seeing that building being built, as you're beginning your size up at that point, where's your FDC connections, where your alarm panels, if they have them, access around the buildings, places where they can't get their apparatus. Do they have areas that they've gone in and put in the pavers with grass over the top of them to access a building? All of that stuff needs to be gathered during that construction period, and you're passing it along.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as somebody said, I think it was Captain Joe said, you know, as buildings are being built in your district, even if you're not in the marshal's office, you can pay attention to that stuff. You're seeing it happen when they drop the engineered trusses off and the engineered I-beams off. You should pay attention to that. I do want to get to one comment in the chat room, and I think we're answering it. Happy to see Courtney is here. She has a very famous panel member that's here. She is a young junior out there in Kellogg. And we're talking about that right now, Courtney. Some of the things we're talking about is adding manpower to the scene. So thank you for your comment. I appreciate you watching tonight. Nice to have you interested in what we're doing here. That's cool. So Greg, what do you got?
You know, it's not strictly about the size up, but about how to get your size up out. And I have to say this has probably helped me the most when I first started in the front of the truck. And it's getting out a windshield size up. So before you get out of the seat. And I know I've got out of the seat at a fire and immediately had somebody, you know, a bystander grab me by the sleeve and start talking to me before I got a chance to get anything out. And I make a point of getting out what I see out the window, out on the air, and try and get an initial assignment out before I get out of the truck. And
yeah, before you get bombarded, yeah.
Just took pressure off me, and it helped my size up immensely. And that's just part of setting yourself up to win.
Right, exactly. Joe, Chief Starnes, tell us a little bit about how we can summarize this. What can we tell some youngsters that are listening to us? How do we process this information?
Well, I think the panel's done a great job. I think the deal is to learn from the people who've had the experience, practice a lot, burn it down in your head before you burn it down in reality. Fight it like it's the worst fire, and then think about it like it's the worst fire, and then fight it like it's the actual fire. So there's a lot of things we need to do, but nothing will ever beat an interested young firefighter, potential captain or officer sitting down with a mature, experienced officer and asking a question that officer can't answer. I always felt like that was your next great officer, because they thought past where we were and what we had fought, and they're using their head to critically think about what they're going to have to do. And the other thing is focus on your role, whatever your role is. If you're in a special ops group, or you're in a truck company, or you're in a squad, or you're in the engine, focus on your role. Make sure you understand what you've got to do and what your firefighters have got to do for you. So those are very important aspects of that. And then the thing that Ethan said, one of the things we've learned in the last few years, and Warren said it in the chat room, is we need to learn more about the flow path. We need to learn more about using optical and thermal views versus just optical views alone. We need to read heat as well as read smoke. So there's just a few, Chief.
All right.
There's a ton of this.
Thank you. Warren, what do you got? Give us a little bit of wisdom to share with our viewers, if you don't mind. Summarize this size up thing for us.
Well, one thing is don't get in a hurry. Or as Coey would say, be deliberately fast. So don't take shortcuts doing the size up, because you need all that information you're going to get from the 360 wherever you're getting it from, if it's a large building. You don't want to be the guy that gets off the rig and goes straight to the front door, kicks it open, and takes your line in, not having an idea of what's going on in the building at all. That's when you set yourself up for failure. Pay attention to what the building and the flow paths, smoke, heat, etc. are telling you. As Ed said, it will tell you the story. And if you have technology available, use it. Use the tip to your advantage.
Excellent stuff. So we covered a bunch of stuff here tonight. This was a great session. I thought this was a good panel session tonight. We covered a lot of quick hits, a lot of considerations for size up. You've got to hear from some experienced officers. I would encourage anybody that's watching this video at a later point, some point in the future, you could reach out to any member on this panel. I think I can speak for all the members on this panel. You can reach out to any and all of us to find out more and to talk about what Chief Starnes was talking about, you know, finding a mentor. You know, the reason we do these shows every week is there is a bunch of experience, all sorts of variety of experience here in this panel. And we'd ask you to reach out and to any of the members of the panel to get further information. So I think we're going to leave it at that. We'll meet again next week. It is the holiday weekend, but I think we will have a show. We will meet. It's after Thanksgiving, but I think we will meet. We'll get a little tangled up around Christmas, but we'll make that decision as we get closer. So we will see you here next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable. Take care, all. Be safe, and we will talk to you again next week.